So if you cannot now see my slides, it would be a good time to tell me rather than waiting till the end. So let's get started. As Ariana was saying, I'm trying to move a Zoom window out of the way here presently because I suspect it's going to be messing things up at your end, but let's just do that. No, the Zoom window doesn't want to move. So it goes, technology rules. So I'm going to be looking at a connection drawing on what we've been developing as multimodality theory. And along the theme of the workshop, this will be particularly clear that we are looking at time and media. We'll also be looking at text, and from the multimodal perspective, text is a concept which we consider very, 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 very broadly indeed. And just to make sure that it's still a usable concept and not just a noise, we also insist on several pretty tightly defined properties that something which is going to be considered a text is going to have. And these properties are often anchored in the notion of discourse. So this is going to be bringing together some of the work we've been doing to make a connection between time, discourse, and media. The particular type of text, discourses, and media which I'll be looking at are film. This is kind of an obvious choice to make because discussions on film and time, they've always been interwoven almost ever since there've been film or something like film. There have been discussions of time and temporality. And so here's a collection of relatively recent, if we consider compared to the early days of film, work on time and film. We've also got the filmmakers themselves weighing in a big way. Here's Tarkovsky's Sculpting in Time, which most of these other books then also cite. And we also have like classics like Deleuze's going into particular philosophical and semiotic conceptions of time in film, drawing on Bergson and also on Peirce. So this is a starting point, drawing attention to film and time having long been connected to one another. Now, these are discussions of film and time. There's an even longer list of films and filmmakers that more or less explicitly deal with issues of time. And we've already mentioned Tarkovsky, also Antonioni, Angelopoulos, and Bellatar. All of these, and there are many more, but these are directors which are very, very explicitly and very, very often discussed as having a particular set of issues with time. We don't have to go to like the art cinema or whatever. If we go to a lot of very, very popular films, from Back to the Future to Groundhog Day, we also have issues being raised with time. And we see most of the theoretical positions that are raised in the philosophy and discussion of time being treated in a certain respect in these, even in these popular films, cyclical time, branching time, free will, is there such a thing? Grandfather paradox, all of these are in there. Now, for the purposes of this talk, I'm not going to be really considering very much telling stories about time. We've already observed in some of the other talks where it was discussed that, yeah, you can do things in film like having flashbacks, just as you can in novels. There's a very, very prominent discussions of the relation even between, say, Dickens and early film structures. So this is part of the telling of time. I'm going to be focusing more on the experiencing of time, since this is one of the ways which we can consider the contributions of some of these directors really not telling us a story about time, but really trying to push experiences of time. Now, I've put these two headings in here. I don't want to suggest that any of these popular films are not capable of raising experiences of time. They do. Punctually in particular places, there are certain experiences of time which are then created, but with these directors, the experience of time is really something which is very, very central. So I'll be looking at this notion of experiencing time and using film as a way into exploring this. So the overall orientation is drawing, as I said at the beginning, on our work of multimodality and multimodal communication. And we've been looking at a broad variety of very diverse media. And we've been pushed increasingly, like many areas, to consider notions of materiality very, very strongly. Now, our definition of the basic construct for capturing signifying behavior, whatever that is the semiotic mode. And this necessarily, in the definitions that we have developed, includes slices of materiality as intrinsic and inalienable facets. So signification or semiosis is always anchored into, engage with, interface to, whatever highly connective word we want to use there, to materiality. Now, materiality is not the materiality of physics. It's the embodied, distributed, more or less manipulable, perceptually entangled, socially differentiated space of affordances that we're always in and part of, or thrown, if one wants to take that kind of terminology. So I think I've got in almost all of the buzzwords there, which currently talk about materiality, but we do take these seriously as a necessary component of talking about multimodal communication. So what I'm going to do for this talk is just give us an indication of how or what can come out of this orientation, and look at some of the consequences which follow for when we're analyzing film. And for the purposes of this workshop, for this session, I'll be taking three perspectives which then come together. I'll be looking at film as discourse. I will be making the statement that we now follow, that there is no disembodied semiosis ever. And also then the third point is playing with time. So we're going to be using some of these starting points to introduce the concepts which I want to bring over in order to make sense of the last part of playing with time and what follows from that. Of course, this will be very brief. We can go into further discussions about any points. I will use some film examples, since that should help us get along and try and see what's being suggested theoretically. I have, however, for the purpose of time, cut the examples to really short, which means that when we go over to a film example, if that works, if the technology supports us, you're going to be thrown right into the middle. And so there's no time for warming up, and I apologize for that. If one was doing this at more length, then the film cuts would be longer. So film as discourse to start with. In the work we've done analyzing film from the perspective of multimodality theory, one of the useful components for analyzing film that we found is to track slices of spatio-temporal happenings. This is what the film is revealing and constructing moment by moment. And we can describe that kind of formally. Here's a collection of shots coming in, and these shots give us clues about a developing spatio-temporal situation. And this, of course, relates to a lot of work in psychology as well on cognition, where events and constructing situations is crucial. So these shots are connected into situations, and the shots give us clues, and the situations that we develop are discourse constructions. So the idea here is, if we have a couple of shots, we have to come up with a theory of how those shots relate together. That is a discourse interpretation. Now, taking that further, spatiotemporal sequences are then used, relying on perceptual realism. That is, we see a shot and it's showing us something. This gives us strong visual indexing, which is really why the medium of film is so powerful. You can get some very complex structures going just because our mental facilities are so good at visually indexing things. And then we build higher order relationships between such sequences. And these are constructed using cohesion and coherence relationships. So imagine, I'll give you an example now. Imagine a telephone situation where two people are speaking, and what one has is then maybe a collection of shots showing person A speaking, and you have a collection of shots where person B is speaking. Normally, if it's a telephone situation, they're in different places. Classical way of filming this would be to intercut them. So you have this. And now look at the sequence of shots. The shots are changing physical location quite radically if the telephones are in different places, but we still see or perceive or work out a coherent connection between them. For example, they might be telephoning. Now, if we do that, then we have a coherent interpretation of why we're being shown very different situations in the shots. This is a abductively derived relationship for explaining, or a hypothesis for explaining how the sequence of shots can be considered to be coherent. Okay, we could find out that the director was playing with us, they're not talking on the phone at all. This is why it's discourse and why it's abductive. But this is a basic structure. It's a very strong structure, and we'll be using this structure as we go on. So I'm going to give an example of how powerfully that works. And so this will be the longest, probably the longest abstract what we'll see. It's going to be a minute. So have a look at this.
Une histoire compliquée. Partir en vitesse. Sortir d'un mauvais rêve. Je connais des gens. La politique. Une organisation. S'en aller. Être invitable. En silence. En silence. En silence. J'ai connu des gens. Tu étais amoureuse? Se servir de mon appartement. C'est comme pendant la guerre d'Algérie. J'ai un frère. Sortir d'un mauvais rêve. Partir en vitesse. Partir en vitesse. Partir en vitesse. Assumer. Discussion. Garage. Yes. Dans le midi. À l'argent. De toute façon, c'était le moment de quitter ce monde dégueulasse. Nous sortîmes de Paris par une voie unique. Reconnaissant deux des siens, la statue de la liberté nous adressait un salut fraternel.
So this is Godard playing with our heads. And if you were following this through, and if you were looking there, you may have noticed that it didn't really play out in a, what you might consider a simple chronological fashion. There seemed to be, if we go by the visual indexing, certain things were being repeated or going back or being shown out of order. And if we then put that out in a diagram, so at the top we have the actual time which we could uncover, and below we have the film time in terms of the shots, and you can see that there's quite a tangle in the middle. So if we say it's the apartment, this was in shot 1 and shot 3, and then the car comes in shot 2, but the car actually was only used much later. This is showing quite a lot of, say, non-chronology. If we then put this into the framework, which I was suggesting for analyzing here, where we have sequences of spatiotemporal situations, and then we're looking for discourse interpretations of how to relate these, then things fall into place very, very quickly. It's relatively straightforward to come up with hypotheses of things like after and before, and we can simplify that even further. And eventually we have a general relation between two sequences. There's a temporal succession relationship, and it's all leading to an escape from the apartment scene. Now, the idea here is that this is why we have a sense of progression and development and goal-oriented movement, even though the individual shots might appear less than straightforward. And films are very, very good at doing this. And they do this because this is discourse. This is discourse organization leading us through all the little bumps which the film can be throwing at us for a whole range of narrative and aesthetic reasons. So this is the discourse basis that we use for analysis, film as discourse. Now I go to the second part, no disembodied semiosis, ever. And I'll show you another short sequence of this, famous for talking about embodiment in film. I'll jump on there. So if you are not keeping up with the extracts, don't worry, it takes practice. But what's going on here is the following sequence. And this is why it's discussed in film theory from quite a lot. We have a picture here where we have a seeming point of view shot with Bateman, and we have then apparently where she's moving, because we have here the shot where she is shown a long way away from the table, then gets a bit nearer, then gets a bit nearer, then gets a bit nearer, and then very, very close to the keys, which she wants to take at that point. And then the next shot shows us looking back, and she didn't move at all. Now, one of the reasons why this is supposed or hypothesized to be a particularly effective trick is because of embodied simulation. And the idea with embodied simulation, and it's carried on here as well, from Galezi and Guerrera, is that people are mentally, cognitively, neurophysiologically simulating, in a sense, which I'm not going to go into here, the embodied actions of somebody that we are being given access to here through the film. And this then, of course, adds an entire range of additional affect and engagement and immersion in what we are being shown. Okay, so that's the idea there. Now, if we then put this together with our discourse interpretation, we've seen that we have shots and we have situations. And now, in addition to this, for each of the shots, we have a running simulation. And the simulation is where the embodiment comes from. Now, according to our theory of multimodality, this applies to all media, all text, all the time. And it's impossible to have an unfolding piece of semiosis without simulation as well. But that can, of course, be richer or poorer. I'm going to give you one example here as well. And this is a little bit longer, but not very long, because again, it's Hitchcock, and Hitchcock is excellent at this. And I want to pay very close attention to the more or less the feeling of what's unfolding here. And I've broken down what should be a much longer sequence into a couple of very short extracts. This is from Marnie. This is her waiting to perform the act of stealing a lot of money from her boss's safe. She's just waited for everybody to leave from the office, and she's there waiting in the bathroom, and then she's going to do the act. Now you'll see here, and if you can't hear very much, then that's the case. It's very, very quiet here. The camera is moving, giving us some of the views of her, so doing a little bit of that embodied part. It's also very quiet. We see her waiting and waiting and waiting, and eventually she goes out. So it's creating this atmosphere here very, very strongly. And then a little bit later, after she's just about to steal the money from the safe, this happens. Again, this is a very, very famous sequence in film theory. Here we have a constructed, it's in fact almost a split screen, although it's real. And then we see another person coming in here, and she obviously doesn't see this person. So what Hitchcock has done here is set up a very tense situation for her. She's waiting and hiding, and then she goes out, thinks the coast is clear, and then we see this cleaning woman come out here and start washing the floor. Now, summary of what's going on, and now it's relating that to what I've said before. We have her waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and then she comes out very, very cautious. We get placed into the office with those point of view embodied shots, and then we see the other person coming in that she doesn't know. Okay, so she doesn't realize that. Let's look at that in terms of discourse. This would be a kind of normal discourse film analysis of what's going on. We have the various situations here. She's waiting in the restroom, then she goes and gets a combination to the safe, etc. and I'll leave that there. It's broken down into little events. This is a classic kind of filmic discourse structure, which we would also derive using our account. Now, by the principle of never, ever any disembodied semiosis ever, we also have necessarily entangled with this an embodiment view. And the embodiment view is really showing these effects, which then we are being put into as experiences of what we are engaging with on screen. So we have a lot of construction of a precarious, dangerous, cautious situation. Now, this doesn't go away. This is all the time. This goes through what's happening. We also have the anchoring of the protagonist's goals. And as we also know from a lot of neuroscience work, then goals are really, really important. And we follow goals very, and you might follow other people's goals very closely. And then we have a concrete threat where we see that there's somebody else there which she doesn't know about. And this is an extended duration. This is 45-second shot. And that's a lot of time to get effectively involved. This is not usual. And again, later on, we see her planning to escape. And then that's also a 38-second shot. Now, what we have here is not only the discourse organization, we have this unfolding simulation. And this simulation is then linked which is another sort of the other side of the coin to the discourse development. And the discourse development gives us large spans, which then can be related or covered with simulations. Now, a note in passing, it's been an increasingly important strand in contemporary film theory to draw on notions of embodiment and philosophical positions such as those from Merleau-Ponty. But it's been a long-standing challenge to say how these instant responses, these very physical responses, haptic responses sometimes to film, how these are related to more extended narrative arcs. And Moritz, in one of the books I showed you at the beginning, says what is missing from these accounts is the importance of context and temporal placement. So it's not that an individual shot is haptically involving, it's how that's placed in a broader narrative context. And this is then precisely what the discourse is now providing us. So we have a view of a large extended discourse, and then there's embodiment unfolding with respect to that discourse. Final part, now let's do that with time. Now the idea here with, I have here a note in the chat which says no sound. Can anybody agree with this? Which no sound? Ariana?
Sound note was for the film, I think, at the beginning, the first bit you showed. But it was a little bit dodgy, but then I'm hearing everything very well.
Okay, then a note back to you, and I'll tell you.
Yeah, Maria said it's okay.
This is Godard. It was silent there. He broke the soundtrack, right? So I'm glad you were paying attention. This is exactly the kind of thing which film does for us. But I think the sound was there. The sound was quite quiet, I will admit. But now let's not look at the sound. Let's look at the time. Playing with time. And this is going to build on the discourse, and we're going to build upon the notion of no disembodied semiosis. Now, given the way the film medium can construct and orchestrate experiences discursively, this is really the experience, and this was the example from Mani, this can be used to stretch notions and experiences of time also in many ways, because there's no requirement that the temporal relations constructed in a film respect physical notions of normal clock time. I will jump over this real fast. I'm not going to show you a clip because it would be really nice. This has been done for quite a while. This is 1955. This is a cute film. I like this cute film. I'm going to give it a quick plug here. At one point in the film, there are some people talking. There's one person talking to another person answering questions. And because it's a dialogue, we have A talking to B. But the answers and the questions, they don't seem to make any sense. And the film does this in a really cute fashion for 1955, because we find out that, in fact, the B time is 7.5 seconds before the A time. So, in fact, they are out of sync. So the person answering a question is answering a question which hasn't even been asked yet. And it's done kind of cute, right? So the point here is that there can be rather more complex relationships involved. And one example of a director who does this a lot is Christopher Nolan, who's been talked a lot. And he's well known as a director who's very preoccupied with issues of time. Many of you, I trust, will know the film Memento. And the thing about Memento is that there's a chronology of events, but it's shown in this kind of curious way at the bottom here, where it begins with the final event in the film, then goes over to another event, and then goes back to the penultimate event in the film and goes back. So we have a very complex temporal unfolding here, which we can now also relate in terms of the discourse structure to make it clearer. So here we have regular time unfolding in a collection of shots. And we have other shots intercut with those, other little sequences, but these run in a reverse sequence. So we have an event here which precedes the previous event shown in the film. Okay, so this is going backwards. And just to rub it in, as he often does, the first sequence is even showing backwards. The film is going backwards. So you can start doing funny stuff with film. Let's do that more. This is Dunkirk. If you've seen Dunkirk, you've got shots here at the giving us an account which is lasting over several hours. But he also has an account which is lasting over a day, intercut with further things which are running over a week. So it's playing with this time here. We see this in, you have spatial temporal strands and they're covering different temporal extents. Let's see this in Inception as well, of course, where it's dream levels which are involved. We've got reality at some level, and we've got a whole bunch of dream levels as well. But they're not only dream levels, they're running at different temporal speeds. So the further down you go, then in relation to the reality part, you're going slower and slower and slower and slower. So he plays with that in various ways. Now, my final example then to really drive things home is from Tenet from last year, where we have the following kind of situation. We have a sequence of shots. If you haven't seen Tenet, then it doesn't make any difference because it's probably not possible to do a spoiler. We have intercut with that some other shots, and where Nolan takes this that little step further is that time is running in one direction for one of these situations, these spatiotemporal extents, and time is running in the other direction for the others. So we are intercutting different time directions here, which is kind of cute. Kind of logical, but it's kind of cute. Now, how does that look? This is my final little extract. This will be a bit louder, so you probably should hear this one. So as you will notice there, then the music and dramatic music, whatever, got a bit quiet because this is also the first time in the film where you as a viewer and this character is really shown things happening at the same time, but running in different temporal directions. So the film emphasizes it there. And this was done quite, this is Nolan's sketch of what's going on, where we have like a mirroring in time. Now let's look at what's different about this. The different about this is that we have the different shots running forward in time and backward in time, but they're put into single shots. They're not like we have one shot going one way and another shot going a different way, which would be kind of trivial. We have in the same shot, we have different temporal directions unfolding. Now, if we then take that, okay, we got time running in different directions within single shots, those ones here. And now if we start adding simulation to that, what is our brain doing trying to get at things unfolding temporally in different ways in the same kind of event? And what I'm suggesting here is that then film is a medium which allows us to play experientially with these rather complex notions of time. Now, I've taken Tenet here because it's so it makes it obvious it's the point of the film. Many directors, including some of the more art directors I had at the beginning there, do exactly this trick of putting different time flows, even different time directions, certainly a lot with flashbacks, into single shots. And if we relate that back all the way from film as discourse to embodied discourse to simulation, then this is a way of really trying to stretch our experiences of time, which seems to be a fun kind of thing for the medium to be doing. So concluding remarks, sorry that, as the film clips take a little bit of time. So film is a tool and playground for experiencing time, not for telling stories about time. We know that, it's been doing it forever, but experiencing time. And this leads us to a more almost general philosophical position that time is our feeling of the unfolding of the diverse experiences of embodied activities we are performing, living, and engaging with. These can be orchestrated medially. If they're orchestrated medially, it requires materiality. And as I've suggested, materiality can be characterized also from a discourse perspective. Discourse spans give more extended intervals and trajectories over which effective simulations are maintained as pertinent in the semiotic sense. There's another aspect of materiality. We can go and look at materiality. We can go back to physics and say, well, maybe we can describe that materiality in terms of time and measurements. I'm going to suggest that more relevant to us as human beings is more the stuff over the other on the left-hand side, the unfolding embodied materiality that we then experience as unfolding, and that then is time. That's where I'll stop. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, John.